Israel asserts control of buffer zone sites, claiming security threats near borders. United Nations General Assembly backs resolutions on Gaza crisis and Palestinian refugees.
33 entitled Demand for Ceasefire.
And Israeli airstrikes on Gaza killed 35 civilians in multiple areas. It's exactly 4 p.m. car local time, and you are now watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Syria. The Israeli occupation army has announced that 4 of its combat units remain deployed in southern Syria. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin called for close consultations between Tel Aviv and Washington regarding Syria. The Israeli army stated that a combat unit addressed threats within the buffer zone, seizing unused Syrian military tanks. The operation aimed to secure northern Israeli settlements, according to the statement.
We're still evaluating the results, but I think that we're going to find.
The Israeli Prime Minister's office has said that Israel entered the buffer zone and taken control of strategic sites near its borders to prevent Syrian factions from threatening Israeli settlements. A statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office stated that the collapse of previous Syrian regime created a vacuum along Israel's borders and in the buffer zone established by the 1974 disengagement agreement. The official Al Masna border crossing between Lebanon and Syria has witnessed heavy movement as thousands of Syrians crossed into Lebanon. Conversely, many Syrians traveled back into their homeland, spurred by the fall of Bashar al-Assad and calls to a return. Lebanese security forces tightened measures at the crossing amid the absence of Syrian personnel on the opposite side. Israeli troops supported by heavy machinery and military vehicles have operated in the buffer zone between Syria and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Following the collapse of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the regime's fall created a vacuum near Israel's border. He warned against groups exploiting the situation to threaten Golan Heights communities with attacks like those of October the 7th. Netanyahu added that Israeli forces entered the buffer zone to secure strategic sites. Egypt has strongly condemned Israelis' continued targeting of Syrian infrastructure, including military sites and equipment, describing it as deliberate destruction across Syria. In a statement, Egypt's foreign ministry denounced Israelis' illegal expansion into occupied Syrian territories, accusing it of exploiting Syria's internal crisis to weaken the state. The ministry called these actions blatant violations of international law and warned of serious consequences. Egypt urged the UN Security Council and international actors to intervene, demanding an immediate end to Israeli escalations in respect for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Iraqi Army Chief of Staff General Abdul Amir Rashid Yarallah has confirmed that Iraq's borders are fully secured. He also emphasized that no threats will be tolerated. The Iraqi Army Chief of General Staff, or Staff General rather, noted instability in Syria and stated that Iraq has reinforced its borders with a defensive line, concrete barriers, cameras, and army and militia forces. Iraqi Foreign Minister Fouad Hussein has announced that Baghdad will propose ideas and a comprehensive plan to address the Syrian crisis. Speaking to the press, he revealed that the Iraqi capital will host significant meetings aimed at stabilizing Syria and ongoing developments. These discussions are expected to present new strategies to ensure regional stability. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf says Tehran is monitoring the policies of Syrian factions regarding ISIS and Israeli attacks, pledging appropriate action. He noted the region is undergoing rapid transformations and also emphasized the need for Iran to turn current challenges into opportunities. Ghalibaf expressed confidence that Syria's future will not align with the plans of what he described as the conspirators. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Jordan for the start of a regional tour following the ousting of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. U.S. officials indicated that Blinken is set to meet Jordan's King Abdullah II and Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi in Aqaba to discuss a comprehensive process for selecting Syria's next government. Jordan's King Abdullah II has emphasized the priority that Syria's interest in respecting the choices of Syrians. In a call with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he also stressed safeguarding Syria's security, stability, and institutions. Jordan's king called for intensified global efforts to hold the war in Gaza, boost humanitarian aid, and ensure unhindered delivery. He warned against escalating tensions in the West Bank, including settler violence and violations in Jerusalem, and urged efforts to secure a ceasefire in Lebanon. A spokesperson for Germany's foreign ministry has announced that the European Union foreign ministers will meet in Berlin to discuss recent developments in Syria and their regional and European implications. The ministry highlighted the dramatic events unfolding in Syria in recent days as a key focus of discussions. France's foreign ministry has reiterated its support for a peacefully and inclusive political transition in Syria. In a statement, it emphasized alignment with UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and the Paris commitment to a free, democratic, and diverse Syria. The ministry called for a transition that represents all segments of the Syrian population. Tensions escalate as Israeli airstrikes on Syria's military infrastructure deepen regional instability and humanitarian crisis.
The situation in Syria continues to escalate amidst ongoing conflict and foreign military transgressions. Syrian media reported that an Israeli airstrike targeted a military site in the western Homs province. The attack reportedly killed 7 individuals and injured at least 11 others. This strike is part of a series of massive Israeli strikes on Syria's military infrastructure, reflecting heightened regional tensions. The Israeli occupation forces claimed their actions were aimed at neutralizing threats and have boasted about allegedly destroying 80% of the Syrian military's military capabilities. Regional sources affirmed that these operations have severely impacted Syrian military infrastructure, with some reports highlighting the destruction of key missile depots and air defense systems. In response, international reactions remain divided. Countries like Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey have condemned Israel's conduct in Syria, emphasizing the destabilizing effects on the region. Conversely, the United States and the United Kingdom have expressed support for Israel's right to defend itself against perceived threats. This has further compounded the humanitarian crisis in the region, as millions of displaced civilians face dire conditions amid limited access to aid. The situation remains highly volatile, with the potential for further escalation. Analysts warn that sustained Israeli military operations and expansionism could lead to wider regional instability and further jeopardize the increasingly volatile situation in Syria.
For more analysis, we now move to Karim Hatem in our newsroom. Karim?
Oh, thank you, Rana. And we are joined now from Cairo by the deputy editor of Al Ahram newspaper, Ashraf Abul Hol. Welcome. Now, what does Israel want from the incursions in and beyond the buffer zone and destroying Syrian military infrastructure?
Firstly, I wish to salute you all. Israel's objective is only one, is just to destroy the assets of Syria militarily, and then Syria won't be able to regain its potentials once again in order to regain the occupied Syrian lands from Israel. Israel has occupied the heights, Golan Heights, and Israel wishes that this current situation to dismantle Syria ultimately to small states. That means they will be overwhelmed with each other, and therefore Israel will be the greatest winner as annexing the Golan effectively. In addition, further that issued Knesset decree to have Al-Golan included to Israeli land, and the UN has, or rather the United States has recognized Golan as a part of from Israel, and Israel wished to make it as an absolute reality and sustained.
Now, Netanyahu just told Jake Sullivan that the Israeli violations of the 1974 agreement is temporary, and there are 2 points here. That first of all, that it's a violation of an agreement and that it's temporary. How do you comment on this?
When Netanyahu talking about the violations of the disengagement agreement, it isn't the main one, but in the Israeli-Syrian conflict that Israel is occupied the Syrian Golan, and the agreement of 1974 is just an agreement to disengagement between the Syrian and Israeli troops upon the 1973 October war. When Netanyahu talks only about the disengagement agreement and ignoring the origin of the issue, which is the occupying of Al-Golan.
All right, now everyone now is monitoring the first few weeks of the new situation in Syria. How do you think destroying military infrastructure could impact the country's hope for any stability and security?
Certainly destroying the military infrastructure of the Syrian army would make Syria exposed upon all scenarios, and they might witness a civil war. Syria will be dismantled. There will be a conflict between the armed factions that control in Syria now, as they have a great numbers and they are current disagreement ideologically between these factions with each other, and therefore a repeated scenario will be happen as the jihadist groups that fought the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and after the fall or the withdrawal of the Soviet troops, they were there was some conflict between these troops and Afghanistan controlled by Taliban. Now there are some concern and fears that conflicts will emerge once again in Syria in light of the vacuum of constitution and the military, and these groups might move their activities to the neighboring countries and pose a threat to the region and the world if they are not disciplined in the transitional period.
Now, there have been statements made by the G7. There have been statements made by France alone, apart from the G7, and Germany, apart from the G7, surrounding or around what's going to happen in Syria and what they want to happen in Syria, including stability and security. Now, what kind of role should the international community and perhaps through the UN play in addressing what's happening in Syria?
Unfortunately, the international community addressed Syria negatively, left Syria that paved the way to exploit the situation and destroy the military assets of the Syrian people, destroying the aircraft, vessels, tanks, the military establishment, and the missile factories, and therefore didn't do nothing. They never intervene in the political processes that are taking place in Syria, and the matter is left only to the tensions of these groups centrally. If they were committed politically, and if there's not, no one would do anything as such. While there's a necessity for the international community and a pressure for all parties from the beginning to maintain the unity of the Syrian territories and the Syrian army and the guarantee to have a peaceful, transitional and smooth for the power in Syria.
Well, thank you very much. That was the Deputy Editor of Al Ahram newspaper, Ashraf Abul Hol. Thank you for your insights and for joining us on Q News. And that's it for me. Back to you, Rana.
Thank you so much, Kareem. And now we move to the latest developments in Gaza. The United Nations General Assembly has passed 2 resolutions by majority vote focusing on the Gaza crisis and Palestinian refugees. The first resolution supporting the mandate of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East was approved by 159 countries, with 9 opposing and 11 abstaining. The second resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip received 158 votes in favor, 9 objections and 13 abstentions. "35 civilians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes that targeted various areas in the Gaza Strip. Local sources reported that Israeli forces' bombings in Gaza killed 7 civilians, including women and children, near the Abd al intersection on the El Garela Street, in addition to the death of 15 Palestinians in a house near a Nosrayot camp and 13 civilians aiding others in the Palestinian city of Rafah with additional injuries. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, discussing a potential Gaza ceasefire and limited detainees releases. A Western diplomat reported a tentative deal with Hamas involving a brief truce and freeing a few detainees. Hamas official Bassem Naim urged U.S. pressure on Israel to accept a U.S.-UN proposal from July. A U.S. official clarified the trip's aim is progress, not finalization. A truce could include releasing Palestinian detainees. Israeli forces have detained at least 40 Palestinians across the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority's Prisoners and Ex-Prisoners Affairs Commission and the Palestinian Prisoners Society reported that most arrests took place in the El Khalili Governorate, with others in Jerusalem, Qalaqliya, Ramallah and Salfit. American media, citing two Israeli officials, has reported that Israel proposed an updated agreement to Hamas involving a partial release of detainees and a ceasefire. The proposal, similar to August negotiations, focuses on implementing an initial phase. Hamas reportedly showed increased flexibility. Meanwhile, the UN General Assembly passed resolutions supporting UNRWA's mandate and a Gaza ceasefire, backed by most nations. Palestine expressed gratitude, emphasizing UNRWA's critical role in supporting refugees and regional stability. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has called for the establishment of permanent checkpoints on roads in the West Bank. Ben-Gvir added that the right of Israeli citizens to live takes precedence, and also over the freedom of movement of Palestinians. And now we move to the latest developments of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in Poland for talks with Polish leaders about Ukraine. Talks include the possibility of deploying European troops as a security guarantee if a peace deal with Russia is reached. With Trump's upcoming presidency, European powers aim to show commitment to ending the war. Macron and Polish Prime Minister Tusk discussed Ukraine's defense and its position in future negotiations with Russia. Ukrainian President Zelensky has used his first meeting with Donald Trump to explain Ukraine's need for security guarantees in any negotiated end to the war with Russia. Sources said that the three leaders talked for 35 minutes without advisors in the Golden Room, did not discuss specific details of any vision for peace, but Trump repeated that he wanted an immediate ceasefire and negotiations to end the war quickly.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. Thanks so much for this meeting. And so we have a very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin, and I think...
That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. Israel asserts control of buffer zone sites, claiming security threats near borders. The United Nations General Assembly backs resolutions on Gaza crisis and Palestinian refugees. And Israeli airstrikes on Gaza killed 35 civilians in multiple areas. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok, at Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.